Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. When it comes to stockpile items, many times food and water get the most attention. And yeah, those are obviously important, but in a disaster, some of the biggest threats are going to come from illnesses, injuries, and infections. If we were to lose access to modern medical care, simple things that can be fixed by a trip to the doctor or emergency room today could become life-threatening. And even if we aren't dealing with a full breakdown of those services, supply chain issues and panic buying can limit access to important medications and other items. Having those supplies ahead of time can help you deal with common illnesses and injuries that are going to come up before they get out of hand. And a really good place to start with all this is just basic first aid items. These are things that everybody should have in their home, and they don't really require a whole lot of specialized training to use. Most of it is either just common sense, or it can be learned by reading what's on the package or just a little bit of personal research. And one thing that every good first aid kit should have is a selection of antiseptics. And the one that most people will think of when they hear antiseptic is going to be isopropyl alcohol. This is the most common. It'll kill most germs, not all of them, but one big drawback to that is that it'll also kill healthy tissue in addition to killing germs. So because of that, it's really not the best thing in the world for wound care. Now, it does really well with doing things like cleaning injection sites, and it also works well for cleaning things like thermometers. Now, if you're wanting something a little bit easier to use than that, then alcohol prep pads are nice to have around. The next antiseptic everyone should have is hydrogen peroxide. And what's nice about it is that it'll kill things that isopropyl alcohol will not, mainly things like norovirus. Now, norovirus is a very nasty stomach bug, and a lot of things like alcohol and other household cleaners like disinfecting wipes, those won't take it out, but hydrogen peroxide will. So that makes it a very good surface disinfectant if somebody in your family comes down with an illness like that. Then another good thing about it is that you can use it in a few different ways. First off, you can use it in your ears. If you have too much earwax or maybe just a tingle, you think you might be getting an infection, you can put a couple of drops of hydrogen peroxide down in there and it might take care of that. Then you can also use hydrogen peroxide as a mouthwash. You take 2 parts water, 1 part hydrogen peroxide, then you can use it as a mouth rinse. But like isopropyl alcohol, hydrogen peroxide can damage healthy tissue, and that's where povidone iodine comes in. Povidone iodine is very good at killing germs without harming the tissue around it, but you should not use it if, say, you're pregnant, breastfeeding, if you have thyroid issues, or of course, if you're allergic to it. Anytime you're allergic to stuff, obviously, don't go anywhere near it. But one of the best things to have around that a lot of people totally overlook is soap and water. Using soap and water to do things like wash your hands and clean out wounds will do a lot of good, and you don't really have to worry about damaging tissue unless you scrub too hard or something like that. And you don't even have to use things like antibacterial soap. Just normal soap and water, if you wash your hands long enough, will mechanically break down those germs, and that's very beneficial for helping reduce the spread of certain diseases. We all know when it's cold season, you want to wash your hands. If you go on a cruise ship and people start puking over the side, you definitely want to wash your hands then too, because you don't want to catch what they have. Then you also want to have some creams and gels in your kit as well. First one that always comes up is triple antibiotic ointment. This is good for putting on just little cuts, scrapes, things like that. It'll help prevent it from getting infected, also help promote healing, but there have been studies come out recently that Vaseline may be just as effective as triple antibiotic ointment. And that's nice because Vaseline is a lot cheaper to stockpile in larger quantities. Then after that, you might want to have some hydrocortisone cream, and that's going to help reduce itching and discomfort from things like allergic reactions, insect bites, stuff like that. And then also have burn gel. This particular one, it has a pain reliever in it as well as an antiseptic, so that'll help you feel better. It'll also help reduce the chances of infection coming up if you get some sort of burn. And if we were in a situation where the electricity's out for a while and you're having to use things like camp stoves or wood stoves, then burns are probably going to be more common, and you might be glad that you had that. Next up, you want to have a good selection of different kinds of bandages. Band-Aids are the most obvious. They're good for little small boo-boos. And y'all, even little things can get bad if they get infected, and having them covered with one of these can help prevent that from happening. Now, for larger things, you're going to want things like larger gauze pads, also rolls of gauze, things like that. That's just going to cover them up. You can also put some antiseptic on those, and then you'll need the tape to cover them up. Then another good thing to have around is butterfly closures. What these are going to do is, if say you have a cut that's just a little bit too long for a Band-Aid to handle, you can use the butterfly closures to kind of zip it up, and then you can cover it up with a gauze pad. So that way you have the skin closer together, it's going to heal a little bit easier. Then you have it covered up with a larger gauze pad, and that's going to help keep it clean. And you want to have plenty of bandages, mainly because you want to be able to change out those dressings as needed. If you let them sit on there too long, then you could end up in an even worse situation if stuff is allowed to fester in there. And with Band-Aids, good grief, if you have little kids, stock way more than what you think that you're going to need, because if they see Band-Aids, they're going to turn into a little hypochondriac, think every little scrape needs a Band-Aid, otherwise their whole arm is going to fall off or something like that. Elastic bandages are also good to have if somebody strains or sprains one of their joints. You can wrap it up with that. Then instant cold packs are another good thing to have in your kit. Folks are going to bump their head, they're going to run into something, have something fall on them, and that's going to help reduce swelling and also discomfort. The next medical prep folks should stockpile is different kinds of medications. And with these, there's a lot of different subcategories within it for treating different things. First off, we have pain relievers and fever reducers, the big three being acetaminophen, ibuprofen, and aspirin. Acetaminophen, also known as Tylenol, is well suited for short-term conditions. This isn't something that you want to take a whole lot of. It's known to have different sort of health kind of side effects. Then next up is ibuprofen. Ibuprofen is nice since, in addition to helping relieve pain and reduce fever, it's also it's an NSAID, which means non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. So it helps with inflammation. So let's say that you have maybe some irritation with one of your teeth. Maybe your gums are a little bit inflamed. This is going to help the pain from that, and it's also going to help reduce that inflammation, which makes the whole situation a little bit better. Then another common NSAID is aspirin. It's going to have a lot of the same attributes as ibuprofen in that pain reliever, fever reducer, can also help with inflammation, but it can also be used for folks with heart conditions, kind of as a low-level blood thinner. And also, I'm sure a lot of y'all know, if somebody has a heart attack, they can take aspirin in the early stages of that, and it gives them a better chance of making it through. Now, an issue with these pain relievers is that you want to be very careful to not mix medications and end up taking a larger dose than what you should. An example of that would be a lot of common decongestants out there. A lot of those have acetaminophen in them, have ibuprofen in them. I think some of them might even have aspirin in them. And if you've just taken ibuprofen and then you take a decongestant with that in there, then that's going to be a problem. Then an issue that's specific to aspirin is that you don't want to give it to kids 16, I believe, and younger because of the risk of Reyes syndrome. Then after pain relievers and fever reducers, the next thing is decongestants. And for this, probably the best is going to be Sudafed. And by that, I mean real pseudoephedrine. A lot of the decongestants that are on the market today just are not effective, and that's not just my opinion. There was a news article I think I read a year or two ago where they were actually considering taking some of them off the shelf because they didn't do jack. But to get real pseudoephedrine, you're going to have to present your driver's license to the pharmacy tech behind the counter, and they're going to have to hand it to you. The reason for that, of course, I mean, people have been breaking bad things in the woods, so that's the reason why it's a little more controlled. Doesn't require a prescription, but you do have to jump through a couple extra hoops. But that's very good for like nasal congestion. If you're having chest congestion, then guaifenesin is very, very good. So between those two, they should take care of most of the congestion that you're likely to have. Then after that, allergy medications are good, especially if you're somebody like me who struggles with those chronically. Your two main ones for daily use are going to be loratadine, which is Claritin, and then cetirizine, which is Zyrtec. And if you have chronic allergies, you probably experienced where you take Claritin for a while, you're going to get kind of a tolerance to it. You start getting allergies again, so you switch over to cetirizine. And if you're in that boat and neither one are working, you might want to try something like Nasacort, which is a nasal steroid that really, really helped me. But also another good thing to have is Benadryl, also known as diphenhydramine hydrochloride. Your allergy medications, they're also going to be good for, let's say you get a bug bite, you're slightly allergic, it can help with that. Also, if you have a kid that maybe has a mild food allergy, nothing too serious, they're not going to go anaphylactic or have breathing problems, they maybe just get like slight hives or something like that, then those kind of medications are going to be useful. Just be sure that you're not giving any medications to kids that are too young to handle them. I know certain things, it's only 6 and up or 2 and up, whatever the case may be. And if you have any questions, be sure to talk to your kid's doctor. So now let's move on to the fun stuff, and that's stomach medications. Out of all of them, probably my favorite is Pepto, also known as bismuth subsalicylate. And the reason why I like Pepto, particularly the chewables, is first off, they're easy to use. You don't have to carry around a bottle of liquid with you. You don't even have to have water to take a bigger pill with you. Just chew these up and then you're good to go. But it also treats a wide range of things. It's good for both nausea and diarrhea. And another really good thing about bismuth subsalicylate is it also inhibits the growth of kind of the bad like germs and stuff inside of your gut. So in addition to treating symptoms, it also kind of helps your body fight those harmful little nasty invaders that make you poop a lot. Now, one thing about Pepto that a lot of people don't know is that it should not be given to kids 16 and under. And the reason for that is that it is chemically similar to aspirin. So like with aspirin, you do run the risk of a younger person getting Reyes syndrome if they take that medication. Then loperamide, also known as Imodium, is good to have as an antidiarrheal. And the main danger of vomiting and diarrhea is dehydration. So you want to have these medications on hand so that if you start having those symptoms, then you can kind of take control of how much fluid your body's losing. And of course, you want to have plenty of water and maybe even something like Pedialyte to help rehydrate yourself. Then meclizine is good for things like motion sickness, and it can also help treat nausea as well. Then after that, it's also a really good idea to have some antifungal creams. Things like Lotrimin Ultra and then also Lotrimin AF. All of these are antifungals, but some of them do better jobs than others treating certain things. Like Lotrimin Ultra is a little bit better for treating things like jock itch, than Lotrimin AF is, and Lotrimin AF does a much better job treating ringworm than Lotrimin Ultra does. And if we're in a situation where we're not able to bathe daily or wash our clothes as much as we would like, then unfortunately, skin conditions are going to become a problem. And the thing with those fungal infections is that many times if you treat them early, then they're relatively easy to take care of, but it becomes much harder to get rid of them the longer they're allowed to hang around and take root inside of your body. Then one thing that a lot of people overlook is distilled water. Of course, that's good for things like humidifiers and other similar equipment. You also want to do your best to have a supply of your own personal prescriptions if you take any. And I know that that can be a challenge to work out. A lot of doctors aren't going to be, that willing to give somebody a whole stockpile of their prescriptions, especially if they're more controlled things. But there are services out there that will prescribe you an emergency supply of your prescriptions. They kind of came from the emergency antibiotic kits that came out several years ago. It's now possible to get medications for chronic different kind of conditions now. Of course, no controlled stuff, but if you have things like heart disease, diabetes, things like that, then there are options out there. And of course, it's also a good idea to have an emergency supply of antibiotics as well. And aside from first aid items and medications, there's some other different supplies and pieces of equipment that you may want to have. Nitrile gloves are good to have around because they'll protect both you and whoever you're treating if there's any sort of bodily fluids involved, because you don't want to get sick trying to help somebody else. Braces are good for treating things like sprains a little longer term, and then splints can be used if somebody breaks one of their bones. Digital thermometers like this one are among the most basic things that everyone should have, and it's a good idea to have them in your different kits. Like a while back, my wife got sick while we were on a trip. Our thermometer wasn't home, so I had to go run to a drugstore and get one. Now, since everything was open, it wasn't a problem, but if you're not able to do that, then it could be. It's also a good idea to have some non-digital thermometers as well in case you can't get any more batteries for your thermometer, or the batteries die at just the worst possible time. Blood pressure monitors and stethoscopes are good to have around for monitoring different conditions that could affect somebody's heart. Of course, if you have high blood pressure, hypertension, stuff like that, then you probably already have one of these just for keeping an eye on things. But if you're in a situation where somebody's not acting right, they're not feeling well, then it might be a good idea to check their blood pressure, check their pulse, see if there's anything weird going on there, so you have a better idea what's going on, and if help is available, you may have a better idea of when to get them that help. Like if there's stuff wrong with their heart, then you know it could be a little more serious. Then a piece of equipment that's a little bit less serious, but still could be important, is a humidifier. Those are really useful during like the times of year that we're in now, where colds become a bigger problem, especially if maybe you have younger kids. It just help them breathe a little bit better. Tweezers are good to have around for things like ticks and splinters. And with either one of those, the less time that they spend in your body, the better, especially with things like ticks, because a tick, the longer it's attached to you, is more likely to spread different kinds of disease, like Lyme disease. Emergency blankets are good to keep in your different kits and your vehicles, while of course you always want to use a real blanket if at all possible. If there's a risk that somebody could become hypothermic and you don't have anything else, then those emergency blankets could come in useful. Then you also want to have some decent reference materials. Something like the Survival Medicine Handbook is going to be a very, very good choice. As you can see, this is a thick book. It has a ton of information over pretty much any condition that you could face in an emergency or disaster. That includes different illnesses, infections, how to deal with different injuries, and also it has kind of some scenario related type information as well. So that's probably the best one to get. Then there's other books like Where There Is No Doctor, Where There Is No Dentist that could be useful to have as well. Then there's also some more advanced pieces of medical gear you may want to stockpile, but with these, you need to know how to use them, meaning that you're going to need some additional training to do that. So getting into that, one very good thing to have is a CPR mask. If you're CPR certified, you're probably aware that if you're doing CPR on somebody that they could be injured, meaning there could be blood in their mouth. They also have a chance of vomiting while you're giving them CPR, and a mask will just protect you and them. I believe this one came with a larger mask for adults and a smaller one for kids. Then also another thing to have around is a tourniquet. This will help stop heavy bleeding from extremities. It basically just kind of kinks the hose, but anytime that you do that, it's going to be extremely painful and it can have long-lasting damage. So if you apply a tourniquet, you need to have a Sharpie around that you can write down what time you applied it. If you're carrying a tourniquet, it's a good idea to have a Sharpie right next to it for that reason. Then there's also hemostatic bandages, stuff like the quick clot gauze. Now, the thing with this is quick clot, other things like Salox and stuff like that, it should not be on there really for more than 24 hours. So anytime that you use this, it needs to be a really dire situation where somebody will die very quickly if you do not put this on them. And they need to be in a position where you can get them to real medical help shortly thereafter, where this stuff can be removed and they can be treated properly. Trauma shears are good to have around in case you need to cut clothes off of somebody, maybe to apply a bandage, or if you're somewhere with one, an AED, because the little pads on those do need to be applied directly to skin. Having some trauma shears will help you cut the clothes off without having to worry about cutting them. Then there's even more advanced things than those that some people may want to stockpile, but be sure that anything that you stockpile, you know how to use, or you stockpile it with the understanding that it wouldn't be you using it, it would be somebody that actually knows what they're doing and has proper training. Because when it comes to things like surgical kits, there's a very thin line between you being helpful and being the freak of the week from an episode of Criminal Minds. Don't be like that. So things like nasopharyngeal airways, also chest seals, other different kinds of bandages even. They require an additional level of skill that a lot of us don't have, and if you want to use those, then you need to go through the proper training to get that, and a lot of it is going to be a lot more than just a few hours on the weekend. Now, if you want to see the 10 main types of items that preppers should stockpile, then click here, or if you want to see the most important kinds of technology to have after a collapse, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.